Japan's one of the wealthiest countries in the world, so one might ask how it's even possible that some of its citizens sleep on the streets. In Japan, you'll find the homeless in all sorts of places. They're on the riverbanks, where no one much bothers them. At night, in the stairwells of train stations, when most have returned back to their homes. On the streets, with scores of people passing them by. In public parks. And in little communities with makeshift wood frames and tarps. In most instances, the homeless reside at the edges, out of the way of the daily commuter. So many Japanese citizens may not even realize that there are even more than a few homeless people amongst them. According to government figures, the homeless living on the streets only make up 1 out of every 20,000 citizens or so. Independent researchers say the real rate is 2.5 times higher, but even at that, it's a small enough percentage that it can be mostly hidden from view. But perhaps what's even more hidden from view is how and where those who have gotten off the streets are living. There's a range of places, from emergency shelters to independent support centers, to public housing, to cheap, no-questions-asked accommodations, and dorm-like rooms set up by poverty businesses. In this video, we'll explore all these places and how a once homeless person might find themselves in any one of them. Let's first talk about emergency shelters and self-reliance support centers.
Basically, the idea is the emergency shelters take people straight off the street. They give you a bath, a shower, a shave, send you to the doctor if you have some medical problems, give you 3 meals a day and a bed, and that's usually got a maximum length of stay of 2 months. In many cases, the idea is when you finished at the emergency shelter, you move on to the self-reliance support centre, and these places have a longer length of stay. I mentioned 4 months in Tokyo. In Yokohama and Osaka it's 6 months, and here they do try to help you get back into mainstream society. They will put you on training courses. They will also do things like help you write your resume, lend you a suit and tie to go to job interviews, and they have, well, at least in the case of the one in Yokohama, they have people from the local employment exchange who come and visit and will help you look for jobs. So they do try quite hard there. Now I'm talking more about Tokyo. There are quite big variations between cities. They also give you a certain amount of money to help you to rent an apartment, buy some furniture for it, and that kind of thing. They don't give you the money in Yokohama or Osaka, but instead they've got this longer length of stay, 6 months, and ideally you'll find yourself a job after 1 or 2 months, and then you can commute from the shelter to the job. So you're not paying any rent, you're still staying for free and getting your meals for free at the shelter, and you're earning money, and the shelter will look after your money, because some people have a problem with poor control of their money. They'll look after it, give you a small amount for pocket money each day, and once your savings have reached a certain point, then it may be possible for you to rent an apartment.
It turns out that renting an apartment can be an expensive task.
One of the big kind of institutional problems with getting out of homelessness in Japan is the high cost of getting into an apartment. Actually, nowadays, rents themselves are not that high compared with other industrialized countries. For example, in Yokohama, you can probably rent a small, modest, one-room apartment with a sort of little unit bathroom and at least a couple of gas rings to cook on for about 40 or 50,000 yen, $400 or $500. So that's not too bad, but what can be a problem is before you move into the apartment, you typically have to pay 2 months' worth of rent to the landlord as a deposit, and in some parts of Japan that's 3 months. Another 2 months' worth of rent as a non-returnable gift to the landlord, and another month's rent to the real estate agent that found the property for you, plus the first month's rent up front. So that's actually can be half a year's rent or more before you even walk through the door. So one of the things that the shelters do is they try and let you stay there long enough and hopefully get a job and save money for long enough to cross this big hurdle that exists before you can resume independent living.
Now let's take a tour of a doya, aka a flophouse. So it can be hard for a homeless person to transition into a proper apartment due to the upfront costs required. That's where doyas come in. As the professor explained in a previous video, they're a kind of flophouse. Keep in mind that this is the Japanese version of a flophouse, which means while they may not be big or fancy, they can still be organized and tidy. A resident was kind enough to give us a tour.
3畳とちょっとですね。畳が3畳分あって、ここが半分ぐらいかな。3畳半ぐらいかな。暖房もクーラーもあって、ここ棚があって、ここにも置けられるように。いや、雑ですみません。ありがとうございます。はい、狭いもんで。寝るだけで。寝るだけ。はい、寝てテレビ。こういうどうやほとんどこういう格好ですよ。ここはトイレです。トイレ。ここは洋式です。洋式。はい、すみません。
何作るの？
いや、ラーメンとか。はい。3人入れます。
Now let's talk about public housing. They're fairly easy to spot once you know what you're looking for. The telltale signs are large concrete apartment blocks with numbers on them because they usually come in multiples. I asked the professor why go for private apartments or accommodations like doyas when there's half-decent public housing located around the city.
Well, there's a shortage of public housing in Japan. It does exist, and it's rationed. There are lotteries. You know, people get on waiting lists, and the top priority is single women with children. Single men with no children are very low down the list of priorities. It's difficult for them to get onto public housing. If you do get onto public housing, then the rent is nice and low, and the rent is calibrated according to your income. So the lower your income is, the lower the rent will be in your public housing. So it's basically a fair, well-intentioned kind of system, but there's just not enough of it.
Yeah, I see that. Same situation over in Canada. But then the professor started talking about poverty businesses, and I can't say that I've ever heard about these back in my home country.
Another major player in homelessness and poverty problems in Japan is a group of non-profit organizations which are often referred to as poverty businesses and hinkon businesses. And what they will do is they'll find a homeless person. They will invite that homeless person to come and stay at a shelter, a private shelter that they have created themselves. And then once the homeless person is in there, they will provide lawyers and help that homeless person apply for livelihood protection. So the same homeless person applying for welfare on his own, he may appeal to the prejudices of the caseworkers, and he may get turned away for various reasons. But that same guy, having had a wash, a shave, and had a clean suit of clothes put on him, and with a lawyer sitting next to him, is much, much more likely to get his application approved. So that's what they do. And up to that point, you could say they're doing a good job. The problem is that once the livelihood protection is approved, the NPO will then take 80–90% of the money that comes in from the welfare payments in the form of rent for the room and payment for the often very basic meals that they provide. And it can be a very good business. For example, what they'll sometimes do is buy or rent a company dormitory, an empty company dormitory. You know, there are plenty of them around. And so you buy it for a relatively low price, and you take a unit. Let's say it's a 2DK, 2 rooms with a dining kitchen space. And the 2 rooms, they'll divide up. They'll put a flimsy plywood partition wall in it, so that in each of those rooms 2 people can stay. So that this 2-room apartment can now house 4 homeless people. And the cost to the NPO, 60,000 yen a month, and they'll be getting like 80,000 yen a month each of 4 guys that they're keeping there. So, you know, you can see how the maths works. You can make a lot of money that way. And so these businesses, these NPOs, are in a kind of grey area of the law, and they exploit formerly homeless people. But at the same time, they are responsible for getting thousands and thousands of homeless people off the street. So they are another factor in these declining street homeless populations.
Where you'll find many homeless and formerly homeless is in doya-gai, aka Skid Row. So the term Skid Row comes from Seattle, and it originally referred to how people would skid or drag logs through the city's historic Pioneer Square. This was a rough and tumble part of town, and thus the term Skid Row came to define an impoverished area, typically urban, whose inhabitants are people on the skids. This specifically refers to the poor, the homeless, or others either considered disreputable or forgotten by society. Tokyo has its own Skid Row called Sanya. The nature of this area is that it's geared towards transient people. As such, you'll see a lot of coin laundry and lockers. It also has services to help the poor, whether it be non-profit organizations, health clinics, day laborer facilities, or doyas, aka Flophouses. Similar to touring the Flophouse, what surprised me about visiting the doya-gai is that if you didn't really stop and look around closely, you might not even be able to tell you were in it. A different Skid Row area in Yokohama called Kotobukicho has a bit of street-level activity, so you might see someone pushed on a wheelchair or a couple of guys drinking some 1-cup sake, but it otherwise looks fairly normal. The biggest giveaway I could say is that you'll see a lot of bicycle parking on the streets. Organized parking, of course, but a type of parking I've not really seen in other areas I've been through. While there are government and NPO efforts to get the homeless off the streets and into housing, however temporary or unglamorous they may be, the fact is that there are still individuals living outdoors. I asked the professor what the situation on the ground is like.
The Homeless Self-Reliance Support Law that I mentioned, which was passed in 2002, includes Article 14, which empowers the people in charge of running public parks to remove homeless people's dwellings from them. That's another reason why that was a controversial law. On the one hand, it created these various facilities to support homeless people. On the other hand, it also had elements designed to get them out of where they already were. And so we have seen moves to kind of gradually push homeless people out of parks and sometimes riverbanks as well. Occasionally, it's involved compulsory evictions with large numbers of police that gets all over the TV and newspapers, of course. So the Japanese authorities don't very often do that. It's kind of a last resort. More likely what they'll do is try and entice homeless people away from the park by offering them a place in a shelter, which may in turn lead to a self-reliance centre, you know, these two-tier system I mentioned, which ideally will eventually get you back into mainstream society. But part of the deal is once you've gone into the shelter, they will remove your tent or your shack, and they will also take steps to stop you from going back there. For example, putting up scaffolding or road barriers around areas that people used to use to sleep in, having security patrols go around to stop new people from setting up shacks and tents, and in this way they've been gradually cleaning out the parks. There are the homeless people's human rights to consider, but on the other hand, families want to use the parks. Mothers don't like it if there's a homeless tent community next to the swings and slides where their children want to play, and so the authorities have to try and balance the conflicting interests of different members of society. If you take a look at park benches around Japan, you'll often find that they now have more armrests, and okay, it's nice to have an armrest on your park bench, but it also makes it impossible to sleep on that park bench.
I also encountered other barriers, such as this automatic floor that prevents people sleeping at the bottom of the stairs, and this chirping sound, most likely designed so you wouldn't be able to get a good night's rest.
Left-wing activists get very angry about that kind of thing, and you know, it isn't a nice thing to do. But when critiquing this kind of practice, you also have to ask, well, what's being offered instead? And what's being offered instead is not just completely abandoning the homeless person, but providing this system of shelters that I've been talking about. That said, these shelters do have a length of stay attached to them, and so it's not unknown for a guy to be sort of taken away from where he was sleeping in a railway station, in a park or wherever, put into one shelter, moved to another shelter, time runs out, and suddenly he's homeless again. Only in the meantime his tent or shack has been demolished or confiscated, and you know, barriers have been put up to stop him from going back to his old place. So for some homeless people, that has had a very negative outcome. So I'd like to put that in the balance alongside my broadly positive remarks about how the Japanese state has dealt with homelessness over the last 20 years or so. It's a mosaic, some good things, some bad things. But overall, I do think things are moving in a good direction in Japan.
So there's a push and pull with the system, with the Japanese government wanting its residents to act and be a certain way, and its residents with their own individual situations that don't always fall neatly within the lines. After all my research, which is nothing compared to those I've talked to, I've come to see the issue not really a logistical one. There are enough homes around the country, but more of one of people that don't fit into the typical Japanese society, and how society itself is responding to try and find them a place. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you all in the next one.